going to be a real special program. It'll complement our exhibit, which is called Voices from the Past. So be sure that you see that exhibit that's set up in our back gallery or our front gallery over that way. Anyway, today we're in for a really good program. We have Kam Wagert, who was one of the founding people for the History Center here. She's currently president of the Daughters of the Republic of Texas. But she also is a collector of postcards. So that's what she's going to tell us today. Every postcard has a great story, and so you're in for a real treat.
Thank you, Pam.
You bet.
Unless you want to change it. Well, this is a cover of the book. Pam, aren't these for sale here?
Yes, they are.
So how much are they?
I think they're $20.
Okay. So in 2014, Pam just kept on me to do a book about my postcard collection of Aransas County. And you know, I always kind of put her off because I'm kind of busy doing other things, but finally she just said, we've got to do it, we've got to do it. So together we wrote this book. And you know, Pam has written, how many books, Pam?
A couple.
A couple. But she insisted that we do thorough research for every postcard. So the way it was, Pam would take a postcard, I would take a postcard, and we would find out everything we could about that postcard. So I can tell you, when you read this book, everything you read in that book is accurate. It's absolutely fact. So there's the cover of the book, and I first want to tell you a little bit about how I got into postcards. I'd say it's about 30 years ago, and I actually went to a garage sale here in Rockport, and for sale were maybe 10 Aransas County postcards, very reasonable, like a quarter a piece. So of course I bought them, and I'm actually a third generation person of Aransas County because my grandfather, his house is now the Sugar Shack in Fulton. So then my dad and mom, Dad built a house for us in 1963 in Coconut Cove, and I actually live in the house that was built in 1968 because I went to high school here and graduated from here. But you know, being like third generation, that's not anything to really brag about anymore because some of the people I hang out with, like the Jacksons and the Brundrets, they're like sixth generation people because they had folks that were living over on the Blackjacks. But anyway, so in the early 1900s is when what we call real picture postcards came about. And they were limited in quantity, and sometimes, in fact, only one was made. And it would be a photograph of somebody. So that happened, and then in the early 1900s, of course, there was not color photography. So they started hand color tinting postcards, and mainly it was done by ladies in factories, and it was very labor intensive, and the ladies would often take the brush and wet it in their mouth before they started painting. So many people were getting sick from lead poisoning in the paint that they stopped doing that. So then in 1930 we had the introduction of postcards on linen paper, and I've got one in here to show you. So anyway, out of all my postcards, now I have about 300 postcards. I think I might do another book. This book has about 96 postcards in it. Did you have a question, Ellen?
I do.
Okay.
When you get ready, could you comment on the sources that y'all use for your information that you researched?
Okay. Our sources, I have to be honest, we used Hobart Houston's Refurio, volumes 1 and 2. We used a lot of, Pam help me here, didn't we use like wood and?
Yes.
Name some more.
We used the Aransas
By
Coastal County.
Sue Taylor, right, okay, yeah. But mainly, I have to say for me, it was Hobart Houston, because he's just, I really like, and if you have those 2 volumes, hang on to them, because they're out of print. Okay, so anyway, here we go. Well, this is a very early postcard of the Fulton Mansion. And here's DJ. She can even tell us all about it because DJ is like the best docent they've ever had. So you gotta help me, DJ, if I get
That's not
confused.
true, she probably is.
So look at this picture. The Fulton Mansion was built by George Fulton between 1874 and 1877. It has a mansard roof and it's in the French Second Empire style. But what's really great about this postcard, look at the fountain out front. Of course, now they have a fountain out front, but look at this. And look at the grounds. And just a fabulous, fabulous house. If you haven't been in it lately, you need to go because it is open. It's completely redone. Now you can actually walk into the rooms and the tours are either self-guided or you can ask for a docent. But George Fulton was so far ahead of his time, you can't believe what's in here. He had indoor plumbing. So, you know, flushing toilets, that was unheard of back then. Everybody else had an outhouse. And the walls are constructed such that he actually took crushed oyster shell and put them in the walls. Now you gotta know or think, how did somebody, he's from Philadelphia, know to come down to Fulton, Texas and put those oyster shells in the walls? Because they deterred termites. They acted as a sound barrier. If we're given tours between the rooms, you can hardly hear anybody talking in the next room. It's so quiet in that house. And also, termites, and they were a fire deterrent. Did I leave anything out?
That's correct.
Okay. So anyway, early Fulton Mansion. Now here's one. Okay, now look, this is what you have to be very careful when you're collecting postcards. Look what it says down there. Built in 1870. That's wrong. That's wrong information. So, you know, I just told you it was built between 1874 and 1877. So that's not true. As the years went by, you know, George passed first on October the 30th of 1893. You need to go down to the Rockport Cemetery because he's got a huge monolith that just got put back up on top of the base of his, where his grave is. And then Harriet lived on, but then she moved to Cincinnati. Then all the contents of the house were sold and it fell into a state of disrepair. But through the years, different people owned it. So at one time it was a restaurant. And then finally, in 1976, the state of Texas purchased the house, Texas Parks and Wildlife, and it opened for the first tour in 1983. It took 6 years to renovate the Fulton Mansion. Well, here it is, the great courthouse that we used to have. It's built in 1889 by James Riley Gardner. He was 26 years old when he built it. It's his first courthouse. If you go over to Victoria, if you go to LaGrange in Fayette County, his courthouses that he built there are still standing. And Victoria's is especially nice. But anyway, he built this $20,000. The jail he built for $10,000. And as you can see, it's basically a Moorish style. Up at the top is a cupola. What happened in World War II, many of the Rockport people would go up into the cupola and look out onto Aransas Bay for enemy planes and submarines, right, David? Did you do that?
Yeah, I did that.
What could you tell us about it? What was up there in the cupola?
What was up there?
Just
Just bare wood benches and opening, nothing was there.
wow.
And it was a very boring job.
David, did you ever see anything? Did you ever see a
Well, we reported aircraft, but there were PBIs, aircraft going around. But no, we never, Lockport never reported anything.
Wow, wow.
Tim,
So-
you mentioned the jailhouse, is that it behind the courthouse?
That's it over to the right.
Okay.
The courthouse, David, help me here because sometimes I get conflicting information. Wasn't it made of shellcrete with an overlay of plaster? Is that correct?
I didn't-
Shellcrete, was it shellcrete?
Which?
The courthouse.
No,
Tell me what it was.
I don't know where the stone came from.
Okay, but not shellcrete.
you have a sample of it in here?
Do we here?
Outside.
And what is it? Stone?
Looks like limestone to me.
No? Let's all go study it after this. Anyway, okay, so here it is in color. So I have to tell you, when they tore this down, 1955, the reason they tore it down is it wasn't air conditioned. And not to mention it wasn't handicap accessible. And at the time, we had County Judge John Wendell, who felt like, well, it's true, anytime a plane flew over, pieces of the ceiling would fall down on your head. That is true. But, you know, it could have been repaired. So in 1955, they tore this down, and if you go to the County of Aransas website, there's actually a clip of them tearing it down. It only lasts about 10 seconds. Okay, here it is on linen. Remember I told you about the linen? And can you see that it has a wrought iron fence around it? Well, when they first built the courthouse, cattle roaming all around the place, and they kept coming up there, getting on the ground, so they put the wrought iron fence around it. But then World War II came, so they had to donate all of the fence for the war effort, the scrap iron. This is the Bayside Inn. The Bayside Inn was on Water Street, and it was, as you can see, 2-story. And the really neat thing about this, it had a long fishing pier that went out into Aransas Bay. And so the people that were staying there, and also the local people that lived around there, could go out on the pier and go fishing or crabbing or whatever they wanted to do. This one, we had a horrible hurricane here in 1919. We don't even call it anything. It doesn't have a name. It's called the horrible hurricane of 1919. Completely destroyed the Bayside Inn. Well, this started out as the Aransas Hotel. It was built by John Traylor, and there's a street in Fulton named Traylor, named after Mr. Traylor. And at the time, it was billed as the largest wooden structure in Texas. As you can see, it's 3 stories, totally made out of wood. The dining room could seat 200 people. It had 50 rooms, and all of the furniture in the rooms, the beds and the dressers, were made by the convicts in Texas prisons. So what happened with this, on March the 2nd, Texas Independence Day, Sam Houston's birthday, of 1919, before the horrible hurricane comes in September, this caught fire. It was abandoned, and it was kind of derelict, but it caught fire. They never did ascertain how the fire started. But what happened, now this is urban legend, is that, you know, heat rises. So a piece of the roof, a big piece of the roof, caught on fire and was lifted by the winds out onto Copano Bay, where it was on fire in Copano Bay for about 4 days. So what happened is people would go out there and fish and flounder around that burning roof. So anyway, it took up, if you go down to where the Daily Grind is, this took up a whole block in downtown Rockport. It was enormous. And there is a historical marker for it, and there's also a Visionaries and Preservation sign for it. Well, this is La Playa. The great thing about La Playa is it was built in 1912 on the Rocky Point. Rocky Point is how Rockport got its name. It's a limestone ledge that was out there. And we have a piece of it out in the back in the yard. You can go look at that. But anyway, La Playa was a very elegant hotel. You gotta remember we had the trains coming in from San Antonio Aransas Pass Railroad. So they had little buggies that would go down and pick up the passengers. They did the same thing at the Del Mar. Bring them over here. In the horrible hurricane of 1919, 11 people got trapped in this hotel. Some of them actually swam to the Leopold Brock House and were pulled upstairs on the second floor by people staying in that house. But nobody got killed by the hurricane. But the La Playa after the hurricane was in total ruins. I want to show you something. This is what my postcard looked like before Scott Wagert cleaned it up. Scott he enhances the postcards to make them crisper or clearer. So, okay, this is the pavilion. Now, here's the deal about the pavilion. The society, we would always look at this and go, well, that's Bailey's pavilion. But then somebody brought in a picture of the same pavilion, and it had Hertzfeld Pavilion. So it turns out that Bailey sold it to Hertzfeld. So it actually had two names in its lifetime. But the great thing about this, look at it closely. Do you see, it's like members of a band coming down the gangplank. So you can see a trombone, you can see a big drum. So inside here, they had all kinds of theatrical productions. And also in the back, in the back, they had little bathing houses that you could, 15 cents, pay 15 cents, go in there, get out of your street clothes, and change into your bathing suit. Now, I said bathing, they didn't swim back then. Oh no, they just sat in the water and kind of lolled around and bathed. But this fabulous pavilion, it was destroyed in the hurricane of 1919. And big pieces of it washed up onto Water Street, including that house, your house on Water Street, right? I know it washed up in front of Janie's house and also Baylor Narvel. Right, David?
We were several blocks south of that.
Did you get any debris from that one?
I didn't.
Okay.
Well before my time.
Okay. So here's another picture. Now look at the top. Now it's Hertzfeld, right? It's Hertzfeld. And come to find out, because we did some research on Hertzfeld, his name was Isidore Hertzfeld, and he was actually a very prominent businessman in Rockport. And inside this pavilion, when he took it over, he had this very elaborate gift shop. I mean, big shells and all kinds of things to sell, but he was also on the Rockport City Council. Okay, this is the Oak Shore Club. Now what happened in 1870, this is in Fulton, it is as you're going, I'm trying to think what that street is, it's kind of to the right of where Harbor Oak subdivision is on Fulton Beach Road. 1870, William S. Hall, who had a big packing plant here, Packery, he built this mansion. Well, then later in 1874, Harriet Fulton sees it and says, I want one bigger and better. So that's another reason the Fulton Mansion came to be built in 1874. But anyway, it started out just kind of as a hotel. It was the Shell Hotel. And then it got sold and it became the Oak Shore Club. And what it is a very exclusive club, mainly for men and their families from San Antonio to come down. They had little cottages on the grounds, and the men would go out during the day and go duck hunting or fishing, and the wives and the children would stay in the little cabins. This one was actually torn down, and there's really nothing there to see of it anymore. This is the First National Bank. This is a very interesting story. This bank was chartered in 1889. It was called the First National Bank of Aransas Pass. And the reason it was called that is because we were trying to get the Deepwater port in the Aransas Pass. And they named it that kind of to, hopefully get some favoritism shown. However, we did not get the port. Carpus got the port. And the name reverted back to First National Bank of Rockport. And this was a big building, and they only recently, Mark or David, when did they tear it down? Recently, like 10 years? Remember, it was like a mall, an antique mall, and then, but anyway, great building. This is the old Rockport School. This was built in 1892. This one is hand tinted, and the lower grades were on the first floor, the upper grades were on the second floor, and I want y'all to look closely because sitting in front is the entire school population. Students and teachers are sitting out in front. And this one had a big bell, and that's how they get the kids to come in. But it was totally destroyed, not totally, in the 1919. Then they fixed it back up, and then they replaced it with the 1935 Rockport School that is on the site today. This was about where the Rockport School on Live Oak is now. Okay, this is a street scene of Rockport. I have a friend, David Murrah, and he knows his cars. So anytime I don't know the date of a postcard, and by the way, I like to have postcards that have a postmark, so I know exactly when it was. This one didn't, but anyway, he could look at cars and tell me about what year this was taken. So this is Austin Street, and look at how wide the street is because we didn't have bulb outs. And this over here is Johnson's Drugstore, and they sold liquor. And also, there's the surf, and that was where, you know, it's an indoor theater. So that's another way you can date postcards. If they have the movie that was showing, then you can go to Wikipedia and look up when that movie came out and you get an idea of when the picture was taken. Okay, so this is an aerial of Rockport. What's great about this, look at the beach. I mean, you know, we didn't have the Saltwater Pavilion, we didn't have the Texas Maritime Museum, and we didn't have the old O'Connor Rockport Center for the Arts building. So what we did have, it's an aerial, but the Quonset hut here is the Jackson Seafood Company. Well, this is an aerial of Fulton, and of course the reason I like this one, I already told you that my grandfather lived in Fulton, and see these little cottages right here? Those were the Poach, P-O-C-H cottages from 1938 to 1946, and he owned them. So anyway, they're not there anymore. They are exactly where the inn at Fulton Harbor is now. That gives you an idea, but look at that. I mean, there's just, look at their harbor. This is my oldest postcard, and it's 1909, and this is Austin Street. Hand tinted, but here's the thing. They didn't have cars. See the buggy. And the surface of Austin Street was crushed oyster shell. Well, here's a boat called the Hooping Crane. This boat went out of Seagun and had excursions to go over there and look at the hooping cranes, but we went different places. You could look at dolphins and you could look at other kinds of birds. What's great about this postcard, look at this little sign here. You know what it says? It says Inco, because it wasn't Exxon back then. That's another fun thing to do with postcards, is to really study them in detail with a magnifying glass and find things like that. Because now, you know, it's Exxon gasoline. Well, here's one. Believe it or not, this is a shrimp boat. Okay, now that gives you some idea of how deep our harbors have to be around here to get this shrimp boat in there. The name of this shrimp boat is very unusual. It's Miss Aransas. The reason that's unusual is most people that have a shrimp boat name it after, like, their wife, their mother, their daughter. So, for example, Mr. Ellie Casterline had boats named, you know, Miss Eileen, Miss Annabelle. So this is very unusual to find a shrimp boat back then that's not named for a woman. Well, that's my favorite one. This is the Pilot Boy. The reason this is my favorite postcard, there's a lot of different reasons. First of all, this is the Sorensen Wharf. Okay, and this is Pilot Boy right here. So the deal with the Pilot Boy, I did a lot of research on this, so this is absolutely true. The Pilot Boy was an excursion boat steamer that went between Rockport and, well, it was called, well, Aransas Pass had been, Port Aransas was called Tarpon. And so they did excursions all the time, and it's, you know, like a party boat. But what happened in 1916, we had a Cat 4, I want to make sure I'm giving you the right date. It was a Cat 4 hurricane, and the boat with 5 crew went out into Aransas Bay. Okay, so I never could figure that out. Why in the world, in the middle of a Cat 4, right before Cat 4, would you go out into the middle of the bay? Well, the reason is, a lot of people thought that if you moored your boat at the harbor, it would get crashed into the rocks or the wood or whatever. So they felt like they had a better chance out in the middle of Aransas Bay. So they go out there, and of course, pilot boy capsizes. 2 of the crew survived. 3 of the crew drowned, and one of the bodies, of course they were all, to be very graphic, they were all stripped naked because of the wind and the waves. But one of the men's bodies just had claw marks all over it because their mascot was a cat, and he had been trying to save this cat during the horrible hurricane of 1916. Okay, this is the Nereid, and I just learned how to pronounce that word because I looked it up on Wikipedia, and a Nereid is a sea nymph. So this is a party boat that would go between Rockport, and you see where it says Nereid of Tarpon? Well, Port Aransas used to be called Tarpon because everybody came there to fish for tarpon, so they named it Tarpon, and then later it became the Port Aransas. Look at that. Well, that's Key Allegro in the very early days. Key Allegro was once called Fronledge Island. And Mr. Fronledge, in about 1868, homesteaded there, and he had a vineyard. There was also a packery on this, on Fronledge Island. But in 1962, Carl Kruger bought the property from the Navigation District for $65,000. And Carl Kruger and his wife Pat had been in Florida on vacation, and they loved the canal homes that they saw in Fort Lauderdale. So he designed and built Key Allegro so it had all these little canals. But this is like 1963. So what happened, Mr. Kruger started at the end closest to where the little bridge is now and worked his way out so that Finisterre Street is the last developed street in Key Allegro. Okay, this is the very famous 1930 causeway, which later became the old fishing pier, and there's a piece of it out in the backyard here. But basically what happened is we had what was called the Hug the Coast Highway. So they built this highway from Houston to Corpus, and it would come through Rockport, called the Hug the Coast. And so they had to have a way to get from Lamar over to our Live Oak Peninsula. So what did they do? They built this causeway. Well, it was 1.5 miles long. It was 20 feet wide. You can see it's one way either way, and in the middle was Bascule Bridge. So it would raise up when a big boat was coming underneath, and you had to wait till the boat went under and you could go your way. This was here until 1967 when they built the second causeway, which was the Lyndon B. Johnson Causeway, but they left this one up, and it was a great place to go fishing because there were lights all up and down, and people would just stay all night out there fishing. But then, when they were building the third causeway, which is the one we have now, this one got damaged by some of the barges, and it's been totally torn down. Nothing there except that piece out there in the backyard. These are the Oak Shore Apartments. These were in Fulton. If you go down Fulton Beach Road and you go past Positosh Fulton Convention Center and keep going a little bit, on the left there's a bluff. You can see it. It's an obvious bluff with some palm trees. These were the Oak Shore Apartments, and they opened in the 1930s as part of the big move in tourist courts and hotels to get that hug the coast highway traffic. But this one, they were apartments with 5 rooms. And then off to the side, they have some little cottages with 3 rooms, but all of them were air conditioned, and all of them had little kitchenettes. So this one is Palm Village. Okay, so Palm Village, if you're going towards Fulton and you pass Key Allegro, right now this is to the right, and it became the Key Allegro condos north. But this started out as Palm Village in the 1930s. And what was really neat about this, there were these little cottages, but they also had maid quarters, they had a playground, they had a private beach. Again, these had little kitchenettes, and families mainly from San Antonio would come down and stay in these little cottages. But they were bought by Key Allegro and became the Key Allegro North condos. So if you see where they are, that is where these were. This is Hunt's Courts. The Hunts were a father and son out of Beeville. So they built these. These were on Water Street, and they also had this long pier that went out into Aransas Bay. And so people would come there and fish and just have a good time. Not any of these are there anymore. So this is the Fulton Mansion, and it used to be a trailer park. So what's really cool about this, there's some Airstreams in here, but this is like in 1956 to about 1976 actually. So you could stay here, but then for 50 cents you could go into the mansion totally empty. There wasn't any furniture. The remarkable thing about the Fulton Mansion, as DJ can attest, years and years of being totally empty, nothing got broken. The original mirrors are there, the original mantles are there, the original hardware on the doors, brass knobs, it's all still there. The furniture was gone, the carpets were gone, but the house was in really pretty good shape. Okay, so this is used to be where our HEB is now. So what happened in 2001, this was I want to make sure I'm getting the name right here. It was the Palo Alto trailer park. And so all of these were trailers, and this is a 2-acre lake. And so in 2001, HEB decided that's where they wanted to be. So they moved in, filled up the pond or lake or whatever you want to call it, big pond, and it is now our HEB. Same place. Well, here's the Marine Lab. The Marine Lab, which is still here in perfect shape, it has a historical marker, was built in 1947. But we had a Marine Lab before that because David Heron's cousin, who is Janie White, her daddy, Albert Collier, had that houseboat called the Vivian in 1935, and he had specimens from our bays on that houseboat. But in 1947, they built this one. What's really great about this one, the downstairs has saltwater aquariums. Get a load of this. There are people actually looking at saltwater aquariums. They were stocked only with species of fish and crabs from Pocono or Aransas Bays. So what you were seeing was local stuff. But we all liked it because it was air conditioned, it was free. So a lot of times we'd go to the beach in high school and stop in here and get cooled off. Plus they had a water fountain. But it was just great. Just a great, great aquarium. But it finally closed in 1986. Well, here is the famous crab, the first crab. Big crab's coming back any day now. Probably sometimes in July, the new big blue crab. But in 1957, we had on Austin Street in Rockport, the building is still there, the Silvermans, Dorothy and her husband, had this building, and it was Del Mar Grill, and Dorothy was famous for her crab cakes. So put this big crab on the top of it. Well, in 1965, when the Del Mar Grill closed, the Chamber of Commerce bought the big crab, and their idea was to put it on flatbeds and take it to parades to tout Rockport Fulton. But it ended up in Veterans Park. And so it was in Veterans Park, and the thing about this crab, it was made out of chicken wire and paper mache, but it was really good. It was, it looked like a crab, but it finally deteriorated in 1976, and it had to be taken down and hauled off, and it was properly buried out in Palm Harbor. So we didn't have a crab for a while. But then a committee, David and me and about Diana and some other people, we raised money and had the second crab built, which was pretty great, until Hurricane Harvey in August of 2017 knocked it down and tore it all up. But the big new crab, state of the art, is made by Joe Barrington, Throckmorton, stainless steel, powder coated.
Right.
But anyway, it's coming. It'll be here in July. Not July 4th, but it will be here in July.
You might mention that our crab was made of fiberglass and aluminum, not to deteriorate, but not designed for a force for hurricane, for 10 grand. The new ones cost 150 grand in place.
That's a point. The fellow that we had build the second crab, you guys, he was a local. He was actually just a fisherman. He came into the Aransas County Historical Society lab one day, and we were talking about the crab, and he said, I can build that. And we said, oh, really, right. And so I could do it, I could build it. So he never had built or sculpted anything, but he came in about 2 weeks, he had a little model of what the big blue crab would be, and it was perfect. So we ended up giving that to the saltwater aquarium, and then David Allgood built this crab, and all he charged us for were the materials. He didn't charge for the labor, and I mean, we got a great deal. If it hadn't been for Harvey, it'd probably still be up there.
Yeah.
And just so you know, David Herring here is a structural engineer, so he oversaw the building of that crab, and he's also working with Joe Barrington, the artist that's building the crab down. All that needs to be done is it has to be painted. Oh, I skipped one. This sawfish, we used to have sawfish in Copano and Aransas Bay, and I do not think we have any anymore. Those people on the bank, those are people from the HAWES Hawes family, and they're still descendants of the Hawes around here. This is great. Look at this little thing here. Sea-orama. Okay, so before we had Seafair, we had Sea-orama. And just look at the beach. I mean, there's no Midway Pavilion, there's no saltwater pavilion, and so they had this little gathering of tents called Sea-orama until 1974 when we started having Seafair. Here's the big tree. You know that Ripley's, believe it or not, in one of his columns, he says that this is the biggest live oak in the world. And of course, we all think it is. Now, I did have some damage from Hurricane Harvey. It looks pretty good. You want to go out there and look at it. All right, I want to talk about why I like collecting postcards. I'm also a stamp collector. So I love to find a postcard that's used. So I could get the stamp. I don't take them off, I leave them on there, but the stamp lets me age it. But I like to read what people wrote. So this person went out dancing on the pavilion. Besides that, it's in cursive handwriting. The cursive handwriting is no longer taught in our schools. So someday, somebody's going to not be able to read this. Well, here we are. This is the History Center. We moved this house here in 2014, Pam. And guess what? The lady that moved it, Lily Wilkerson, out of Sinton with Ram Movers at the time, this was the heaviest house she's ever moved. It used to be over there by where the old courthouse was on Concho. Now the heaviest building she's ever moved is the Klein's Cafe. And now she's retired. But anyway, here it is, and if you haven't yet been through the exhibit, Pam has put together the long-term exhibit, but the actual exhibit, just look at every case, it's just full of memorabilia and things that are very, very interesting. So I thank you for coming. Does anybody have a question? Alan,
What's the most you ever paid for a card?
Scott in the room? I paid $100 for a view from the old courthouse. It's called the Bird's Eye View. It's in the book. Yeah, I paid $100, but now I don't pay. They are ridiculous, the prices, because I think I'm bidding against somebody. I've talked about this with a man named Phil Alvin. You know, I'll bid, and inevitably the bid just keeps going higher and higher and higher. And used to, I could get a postcard easily for $10, $15, and now $100, $150, $200. I can't do that. I mean,
The last time I went to a show, a real photo postcard begins around $25, and they just go up.
it's just crazy. It's crazy. But on the other hand, they're out of print, obviously. I mean, you know, they're not going to be anymore. So you got to decide what's worth it. That was the most I ever paid, and I will not do that again. So anyway, guess what? The book is for sale. Book is for sale, and all the proceeds go to the History Center. Pam and I can autograph it for you if you get one.
Absolutely.
When can we expect volume 2?
I'm working on it. I have at this point about 300 postcards. And you know, I have to say, my whole collection's not in here. That's why you need to look at the book, because the book has pretty much what I originally had, but now I've got about 200 more. I thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And be sure you look at the exhibits before you leave.